She thought he was just a hostile guest, until a helicopter landed and revealed he's a millionaire. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is now. Subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Clara's voice cracked, a fragile sound against the din of Zurich airport. "Dad, I'm not coming home yet. I need to find something real." Her fingers pressed the phone tight, knuckles white. Blonde hair, pulled into a loose braid, shifted with her breath. A travel-worn backpack slumped against one shoulder. "Silence," she added, softer, a whisper for her own ears. "You don't have to understand. I can't go back to pretending." The call ended. Her hand still trembled. She flagged the next train for Interlaken. 4 days. 4 days since she'd called off the wedding. 4 days since she looked at the man she was to marry and realized he never truly saw her. Not the way she needed. That night she packed everything. A one-way flight to Switzerland. No itinerary, no plans. Just her. And the quiet, fragile hope that maybe, far from everything, she could begin anew. By late afternoon, she stood outside a tiny Alpine hostel. It nestled between white-capped mountains, a vision from a snow globe. Wooden shutters, ivy climbing its sides. A small red sign proclaiming simply, "House." The air, sharp and clean, held the scent of pine and distant snow. She checked in, took a long, hot shower, letting the steam loosen the knots in her shoulders, then wandered into the communal kitchen. A low hum of voices filled the room, a gentle symphony of strangers. She sought tea. That's when she saw him. Ethan. He sat alone at a corner table near the frosted window, a knit beanie pulled low over dark curls. Sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the cold. A battered brown notebook lay open before him. He wasn't eating, just writing. Occasionally he would pause, lifting his gaze to the falling snow outside, as if waiting for it to whisper a secret he'd missed. His stillness, like a deep pool, seemed to draw the noise from her own head, quieting the restless hum of her thoughts. The hostel pulsed with life. College kids on ski trips, their laughter bright. Retirees chasing postcard views, their voices soft with reminiscence. Solo wanderers like Clara, each perhaps trying to outrun a shadow of their own. But Ethan fit no mold. He never joined the boisterous group dinners by the fireplace, never drank by the glowing embers. Yet he was not unfriendly. He simply observed, a quiet sentinel in the periphery. Over the next 3 days they shared the same space. Their exchanges were few, polite nods, murmured greetings. Clara noticed the small things, how he always helped wash dishes even if he hadn't eaten, how he refilled the kettle when it emptied, the gentle clink of ceramic on ceramic, how he'd leave behind a folded napkin on the table, a small doodle or a cryptic quote penned in neat, precise script for the next person who sat there. Always anonymous, always quiet. Clara tried not to be curious, but something about his unspoken presence, his understated grace, pulled at the fragile threads of her unraveling heart. He was a silent anchor in a world that had suddenly gone adrift. On the 4th evening after dinner, Clara stepped outside. Snow had begun again, light and slow, like feathers drifting from the sky. She walked to the edge of the small garden behind the hostel, where the skeletal trees met the open night, and sat on a stone bench, dusted in white. The chill air caressed her cheeks. That's when she saw him again. Ethan. He stood about 10 feet away, coat open, head tilted to the sky as flakes landed gently on his lashes. He didn't move, just breathed, as if the forest had become a chapel and the snowfall a prayer. Clara watched, silent. Then, as if he felt her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just gave a slow, respectful nod. And something in Clara, something tired and afraid and hopeful, nodded back. She didn't know it yet, but the man with the notebook had already seen glimpses of her truest self. He held in his quiet observations a tapestry of small gestures and fleeting expressions. The subtle dance of her hands, the flicker of emotion in her eyes, the rare bell-like quality of her laughter. He saw her, not with his eyes only, but with a quiet understanding that bypassed words, like a shadow half seen in the soft light of dawn, knowing more than any spoken greeting could convey. The days in Interlaken draped themselves over Clara like soft wool, each moment a quiet unfolding. She saw Ethan every morning in the communal kitchen, perched at his usual corner, a silent fixture against the frosted pane. The scent of coffee, dark and rich, was his morning offering, a warm embrace wrapping around the old wood beams of the hostel. He never spoke much, just a quiet nod if their eyes met, then back to his notebook. His pen moved with the deliberate grace of someone charting forgotten constellations, or perhaps writing the last letter of their life. His focus was absolute, a world contained within the worn pages. Clara, drawn by the stillness that surrounded him, tried a few times to breach the quiet. A comment about the fresh snow, soft and pristine. A light joke about the perpetually crowded hostel fridge, overflowing with disparate foods. Ethan would answer, his replies clipped, polite, like pebbles dropped into a deep well. But the moment her words stretched longer than necessary, his gaze would drop. His hand, as if tethered by an invisible string, would return to his pen, clutching it like a safety net. It was as if sound itself was a burden for him, a distraction from the heavy quiet he seemed to carry. Clara could have let it go, let the silence settle back between them, thick and undisturbed. But something within her, a persistent, unspoken yearning, nudged her on. Then she fell. It was her second attempt at skiing. The beginner's trail had lulled her into a false confidence after one successful morning. The snow had been forgiving then, soft and powdery. But today, a treacherous patch of ice, hidden beneath a fresh dusting, caught her off guard. She tumbled hard, a clumsy tangle of limbs and skis, a sharp pain lancing through her ankle. The cold, crisp air was knocked from her lungs. She lay there for a moment, the vast white expanse of the mountain seeming to mock her bruised pride. Limping back to the hostel, each step a dull throb, her skin scraped raw beneath her layers. She felt a familiar weight descend, the sting of inadequacy, the cold truth of fragility. That night she sat on her bed, a cold compress wrapped around her swollen ankle. The hostel hummed around her, distant laughter, the murmur of voices, but in her small room, a profound quiet settled, heavy with discomfort. Then a soft knock came at her door. No voice called out, no footsteps echoed down the hall. A hesitation, then another gentle tap, like a bird pecking at glass. She opened it slowly. There, resting on the small wooden ledge outside, was a small metal thermos. Steam still rose faintly from its spout, a wisp against the cool air. A post-it note, neatly stuck to its side, bore tidy, unassuming handwriting. Add honey if you want, or drink it stubborn. No signature. But Clara knew. She knew from the quiet warmth radiating from the thermos, from the gentle humor of the words, from the very anonymity of the gesture. She knew from that moment something shifted. A delicate, almost imperceptible turning point, like moonlight shifting on a lotus pond, had occurred within the silent space between them. As Clara curled her fingers around the warm metal, a sudden ache blossomed in her chest, not from her ankle, but from deeper within. The words, so simple, yet so knowing. Drink it stubborn. He had seen her, seen the pride, the slight resistance, the quiet determination that sometimes bordered on self-punishment. He hadn't asked. He hadn't pried. He had simply acted, a gentle kindness offered without expectation. And in that moment, she sensed a profound sadness in the gesture, a familiar echo of a sorrow he carried unseen. It was the quiet kindness of someone who understood loss, who knew the cold embrace of sorrow, and chose to offer warmth from the depths of their own aching heart. The truth of his quiet suffering, a heavy weight carried unseen, hid in that unspoken offering, like a song caught in the throat, its melody felt but not heard, revealing more than any loud confession ever could. The warm, lingering presence of the thermos on her bedside table, and the quiet kindness it represented, settled deeply into Clara's spirit. Something had shifted. A fragile, almost imperceptible crack had appeared in the hardened shell around her heart, allowing a sliver of warmth to seep in. The next evening after the hostel dinner, the thought came to her, simple and clear: help out. She found Ethan already there, sleeves rolled up, wiping down the long wooden counter with methodical precision. He moved with a quiet purpose that filled the space, transforming the mundane chore into something almost reverent. Clara joined him in silence. She began passing plates, stacking bowls, the clink of ceramic on ceramic the only sound between them. It was the first time they stood shoulder to shoulder, close enough to feel the subtle shift of the air around him, without the heavy quiet pressing between them. The previous silences had felt like barriers, walls built high and thick. This one felt different, like a comfortable shared space, a soft blanket woven from unspoken understanding. The air hummed, not with tension, but with a nascent connection, a delicate thread stretching between two solitary souls. "Do you like Swiss Rosti?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice low, not looking up, his gaze fixed on the counter he polished. Clara blinked. The question, so direct, so unexpected, startled her. "I don't know," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "Never had it." He finally looked at her then, a brief, fleeting glance that held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Amusement, curiosity. "I'll show you." He moved with an uncharacteristic confidence, pulling out potatoes, a block of cheese, fresh herbs from a small basket. His hands were steady, sure, surprisingly gentle. He showed her how to grate the potatoes without nicking her knuckles, his own hand mimicking the motion slowly beside hers, a silent lesson. The faint scent of earthy potato, sharp cheese, and aromatic herbs filled the air. When she added a pinch too much salt to the mixture, he smiled, faintly. Not teasing, just amused. It was a fleeting curve of his lips, but it transformed his face, softening the shadowed depths of his eyes like sunlight breaking through clouds. He did not ask about her past nor pry. Yet through his quiet observations, he seemed to gather small fragments of her being. Her preference for unsweetened tea, a detail gleaned from a hurried breakfast. The way she ate her bread crust first, a quirk she hadn't realized anyone observed. He saw how she paused when reading signposts, mouthing foreign words as if tasting a new fruit on her tongue. These were small things, trivial to anyone else, yet he held them, as if they were precious fragments of a forgotten melody. One evening, a golden haze spilled from the hostel windows, lighting the snow-dusted garden. Clara sat outside under the whimsical fairy lights strung between the branches, teaching a small group of local children basic English phrases. She used gestures, simple rhymes, made funny animal sounds to elicit their bright, uninhibited laughter. They adored her, their small faces upturned, eyes sparkling with delight. When the last child had been picked up by a parent, Clara leaned back on the stone bench, cheeks flushed from the cold and the sheer joy of their innocent energy. The wind tugged loose strands from her braid. She turned and saw Ethan watching her from the kitchen window. His expression, softened by the distance and the dusk, was more tender than she had ever seen. He didn't wave, didn't move, but for the very first time he smiled, truly smiled. A full, genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It hit her like the first warm breeze after a long, bitter winter, melting away a layer of her own careful defenses. Later that night, Clara found a plate waiting for her on the long kitchen table. A slice of warm apple tart, golden and fragrant, sat beside it. Folded neatly was a square of paper, torn from a notebook, its edges soft. In his careful script, it read, "You teach them like someone once taught you." Clara stared at it, her heart suddenly loud, hammered against her ribs. This was not the message of a passing stranger. This was someone who saw her, not just the surface, the travel-worn facade, but the roots she rarely let show. The words resonated with a haunting familiarity, a connection to a past she knew nothing about, yet felt oddly drawn into. She picked up the note, her fingers trembling slightly, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was drifting. She felt known, and in that quiet revelation, she saw Ethan not just as a mysterious, silent man, but as a kindred spirit, like a familiar face seen anew under the soft, revealing glow of starlight. This truth, unsaid, reshaped her view of him entirely. The hostel felt different that morning. The usual hum of backpackers making coffee, the rustle of maps unfolding, was quieter, almost subdued. The air held a strange stillness, as if the world outside was holding its breath. Clara stepped into the communal kitchen, her gaze instinctively drawn to Ethan's usual spot by the window. His chair was empty. His coffee mug, usually sitting beside him, already washed and put away, gleamed innocently on the drying rack. A faint frown touched Clara's lips. She glanced around the room, a subtle unease beginning to ripple through her. She checked the front desk. The young attendant, engrossed in a novel, shook her head. No one had seen him leave. No bags were left behind, no note, just absence. A hollow space where a quiet presence had been. The lingering scent of cinnamon from last night's tart seemed to mock the sudden emptiness. Back in the kitchen, a glint of worn leather caught her eye. On the table, just where Ethan had often sat, rested a small, weathered notebook. The very one he always kept close, a constant companion. Its edges were soft, frayed from years of turning pages, a testament to countless thoughts confided within. Clara hesitated. Her heart gave a sudden, hard kick against her ribs. This felt like crossing into someone else's thoughts, a forbidden glance into a hidden garden. But something in her chest, a persistent, undeniable nudge, pushed her forward. Her fingers, trembling slightly, curled around the worn cover. She slowly, carefully opened it. The first page was blank. The second, too. Her breath hitched. But on the third page, a rush of neat, careful script. Her name wasn't written directly, yet she knew, with an absolute certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that it was about her. The entry began. She walked into the hostel like she had just walked away from something that broke her, but she smiled at the snow, and that was enough for me to know she hadn't given up on beauty. Clara blinked, her vision blurring. Her heart kicked harder, a frantic drum against her ribs. She flipped to the next page. She hums when she washes dishes, little melodies I do not recognize, but they stay in my head after she leaves. And then another. She talks to children like they are worth listening to. I do not remember anyone ever doing that for me, but she does it without trying. Page after page, Ethan's voice, so rarely heard aloud, filled the quiet kitchen. Descriptions so detailed, so intimate, that Clara felt as though she was looking at herself through a mirror she had never seen before. Her laugh, her tea habits, the way she lipped her thumb to turn pages, tiny, almost imperceptible things. Things no one should have noticed. But he had truly seen her. And then, near the end, written with a hand that seemed to tremble even on the page, I thought love was something I had buried with her. But this girl, she made the silence inside me less terrifying. If I ever find the courage to love again, it would be her. Clara's breath caught, sharp and painful. She recognized Sophia's name from the previous, fleeting mentions. A cold dread seeped in, mixing with the warmth of his words. This wasn't just a crush. It was a profound, vulnerable confession, born from the very depths of a soul scarred by loss. But what came next? Clara's fingers instinctively tightened on the notebook. Tucked between the pages, beneath those final, raw words, were detailed architectural sketches. Floor plans, elevations, precise measurements. They were not for a house, but for a building, sprawling and purposeful. A community medical center, nestled into a mountainous landscape. Accompanying notes spoke of sustainable materials, solar panels, a healing garden, and then a faded newspaper clipping, tucked loosely within the folds of a blueprint, an obituary for Sophia Mendez, describing her as a passionate social activist, dedicated to humanitarian projects. The article mentioned her final journey was to a gala to raise funds for her very first medical center project in Switzerland. Clara stared. The world tilted. Ethan Harrison, the heir to a medical group. Sophia, her tragic death en route to a fundraiser for this very project. Ethan hadn't just been seeking peace in the quiet mountains. He had been here, in this quiet corner of the world, wrestling with his grief, secretly working to fulfill Sophia's last wish. The hostel, the very stillness of the Alps, the solitary path he walked, it was all part of Sophia's unfinished plan. This wasn't merely a silent crush. This was a profound, unspoken commitment to a legacy, a dream striving to be revived, a deeper thread now tied to a memory and meaning that Clara had entirely unnoticed until this moment. The notebook wasn't just a window into his heart. It was a map to a purpose, vast and resonant, stretching far beyond their quiet, shared moments. Clara left the hostel with her backpack slung across one shoulder, the worn notebook clutched tightly in her hand. Its pages felt heavier than paper should, like they carried the weight of something unspoken, something sacred, a whispered secret woven into the very fabric of her being. Interlaken had been meant to be a stopover, a pause in a long string of aimless wandering after the collapse of the life she thought she wanted. But now it was more. It had become a place where something had stirred inside her. A place where her heart had cracked open just enough to let the cold in, and something warm, something tenacious, fight back. Every path she walked now reminded her of him, the snowy hill where they once stood in silence, watching local children build snowmen, their laughter bouncing off the ancient trees. He had offered only his quiet presence then, a silent anchor in her storm. The tiny bakery tucked between narrow alleyways, where she had once forgotten her wallet and turned red with embarrassment, only to find minutes later the coffee already paid for. She had never seen him do it, but she knew it had been him, a ghost of kindness. A lakeside bench where he often sat in the mornings, notebook open, pen moving like the world was made of ink and memory. He never spoke unless spoken to, but she had always felt seen, not watched, just noticed. These were fragile threads spun from silence and shared space, now pulling at her heart. Clara tried to shake the memories. She told herself it had been just a moment, just a passing connection between two people whose lives had briefly crossed in a snow-covered corner of the world. It meant nothing. It couldn't mean anything. But her heart knew better. The words from his notebook echoed in her mind, a quiet mantra. If I ever find the courage to love again, it would be her. And then, the blueprints, the medical center, Sophia's name, a tapestry of unspoken sorrow and quiet purpose. Late one night, wrapped in a thin blanket against the chill, watching snowfall outside a train station window, Clara finally gave in. The yearning was a dull ache, insistent and undeniable. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the familiar contact. No, not a friend, a different kind of connection. She typed a message to the hostel's manager. Do you remember Ethan, the guy with the backpack and the notebook? Do you know anything about him? She didn't expect a response, not really. It was a shot in the dark, a whisper against the vastness of the night. But in the morning, her phone buzzed, a single message. Quiet guy, right? Always cleaned up after himself. Left the place spotless. Only thing I found after he left was a receipt. Said he made a call from our desk phone to a hospital in New York. Clara's breath caught. Her fingers went cold, gripping the phone as if it might slip away. A thread, a beginning. A fragile, shimmering possibility. She followed it. She spent the day in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Lucerne, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold beside her laptop. She searched every variation she could think of. Hospital directories, foundation websites, press releases, even obituary pages. Nothing. A vast blank wall. Until suddenly everything. Ethan Harrison. She stared at the name on the screen. Heir to the Harrison Medical Group. Son of Dr. Elliot Harrison, world-renowned neurosurgeon. And then, the part that twisted her insides. Ethan himself had once been a rising figure in the public health world until 3 years ago, when his fiancée, Sophia Mendez, died in a car crash on the way to a gala. He had been waiting for her at the venue. She never arrived. The article continued, detailing Sophia's passionate work, her dedication to underserved communities, her vision for accessible healthcare. It spoke of her ambition to build small, localized medical centers, starting with her very first project in the Swiss Alps. After her death, Ethan vanished from public life. No statements, no photos, nothing, until now. Clara sat frozen, the notebook still resting on the cafe table like it knew more than she did. The man she had laughed with over misburnt toast and dish soap battles had been holding grief so deep it drowned his words. And yet, he had written about her in that notebook. He had dared to capture her laugh, her stubbornness, her quiet acts of kindness to children who barely knew English. He had called her the first light he had seen in years, and then he had left. Not out of cruelty, but fear, because he had loved before and lost. And somewhere between the falling snow and the shared silence, she had made him remember what it felt like to care again. Clara's hands trembled as she held the notebook. This was not just about romance. This was about trust, about healing, about two people who had run from pain and somehow collided into something fragile and rare. Ethan had given her more than his words. He had given her a choice. And now it was her turn to choose whether she would let that gift slip through her fingers or chase down the man who had once believed in forever and was quietly asking if maybe, just maybe, it could still exist. Her own heartbreak, the raw wound of her unfulfilled life, felt strangely connected to his, a silent empathy. She understood now. Like a crack in a village well, his deep wound needed to be filled not just with love, but with renewed purpose. Clara found herself on a quiet hill outside the village, the kind of stillness that held its breath before something momentous changed. The snow fell lightly, just enough to kiss the tips of her boots, each flake a whisper against the vast silence. In her lap, a new notebook lay open, its pristine pages a stark contrast to Ethan's worn one. She had begun it the day he disappeared, filling it slowly, not with answers, but with questions that coiled in her heart like unspun silk. Why did he leave? Why did he write about me? And why did it feel like he had taken something of mine with him, something I had not known I needed until it was gone? Her pen hovered, tracing the delicate outline of a snowflake on the page, each query a longing breath in the cold air. She was halfway through a sentence, grappling with the weight of her own vulnerability, when her phone buzzed beside her. One message, no number, no name, only 2 words, stark against the glowing screen. Look up. Clara blinked. Her heart immediately thudded, a sudden, frantic rhythm against her ribs. An illogical surge of hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through the quiet introspection. She lifted her gaze, squinting into the vast white canvas of the sky. At first there was nothing, just the endless, muted white. Then a distant thump, a low, rhythmic thrum, growing steadily louder. The clouds, thick and gray moments before, parted slightly like a curtain drawn back by an unseen hand. A small, sleek helicopter emerged, a dark silhouette against the pale sky, slicing through the snow-dusted air with elegant precision. It circled once, a graceful, predatory bird, then slowly, deliberately, began its descent toward the open stretch of field beside the hill. The sound swelled, a powerful, whipping roar that filled the quiet valley, vibrating through the very ground beneath her. Clara stood slowly, her breath caught in her throat. The wind from the landing blades whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks with icy flakes. Her backpack felt heavy, the notebook a tangible weight in her hand, a fragile anchor in the sudden storm. The door of the helicopter opened with a soft hiss, and there he was. Ethan. He stepped out, no backpack slung over his shoulder, no battered notebook clutched in his hand, no shadows under his eyes. He was dressed not in worn jeans and hiking boots, but a tailored black coat, dusted lightly with snow, the fabric sleek and dark. His posture was straighter, a quiet strength emanating from him, though his gaze as it swept the expanse held a familiar intensity. In his right hand, a small velvet box, dark, ominous, yet filled with an undeniable promise. Clara stood frozen. The journal still clutched in her hands felt like a silent witness to a moment long awaited. He approached, his steps steady, unhurried, as if he had rehearsed every movement in his mind 1,000 times. The distance between them, once vast, diminished with each deliberate stride. When he reached her, he stopped. The silence that fell between them, after the roar of the helicopter had faded to a low thrum, was thick, thick with memory, thick with all the things they had not said, and thick with all the things that still could be said. Ethan's voice broke the stillness, low and resonant, carrying the weight of years. I lost her because I was afraid, he said, his eyes dark and deep, never leaving hers. Afraid to love again, afraid that if I let anyone in, I'd lose them too. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the cold air filling his lungs. But then I met you, and it was quiet. It was never loud, never fast, but it was real. He lowered himself onto one knee, in the snow. Clara gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth, a soft, involuntary sound that was lost in the vastness. Ethan opened the box. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a simple ring. No towering diamond, just a smooth silver band, catching the faint light. Engraved with one line from the notebook, a line she knew by heart, a line that had pierced her soul. The world got softer when she smiled. I came back, he said, his voice raw with emotion, because I'm not afraid anymore. I don't want the version of life I thought I had to live. I want the one that finds me in hostels and snowstorms. I want the one with you. He paused, his gaze unwavering, full of a fierce, quiet hope. Will you let this be our real story? Clara's eyes blurred with tears, hot against the cold air. She looked at him, not the heir to a medical empire, not the man who had once vanished, swallowed by grief, but the boy who had quietly watched her teach children, the man who had left hot tea by her door, the soul who had truly seen her, capturing her essence in whispered words on paper. He offered not a grand rescue, but a shared journey. She knelt too, her own knees sinking into the snow, and whispered, her voice barely audible, yet certain as the mountain peaks around them. I was waiting for you to come back, not for the ring, just for you. Ethan smiled, truly, profoundly smiled. His eyes were bright, shimmering with unshed tears, but his shoulders, once burdened by an invisible weight, seemed to finally unburden themselves. They stood together in the snow, the velvet box now closed, resting gently between them. It was not a promise of forever, etched in stone, but a quiet sign, a soft understanding that they were ready to begin. Not a new chapter, built on old foundations, but the first one, written with both their hands, a path leading to an unexpected yet perfect home. What she sought, perhaps, was a grand declaration, a sweeping cinematic moment. But what she found was something far more profound, a quiet, resolute commitment, born of shared vulnerability and a deep true seeing. His return, heralded by the helicopter, was not just an act of love, but a testament to his renewed resolve. He had faced his deepest fear, the fear of loving and losing again, and he had chosen to step forward. This reunion, so dramatic in its arrival, was at its heart a simple reckoning, a gentle turning point. He wasn't seeking solace in isolation anymore, nor merely fulfilling a sacred promise alone. He was offering a shared future, entwined with the legacy he carried. The twist of his past, the depth of Sophia's unfulfilled dream, now opened into a new possibility, a pathway for two souls to walk together towards a purposeful horizon. 2 months later, the snow had melted, just enough to reveal wildflowers scattered across the green hills like forgotten jewels. The sky above was clear and unbroken, a vast, crisp blue that seemed to stretch forever, framing the jagged ridges of the Swiss Alps like a silent cathedral. There was no golden aisle, no glittering chandeliers, no champagne flutes clinking in celebration. Only the wind, a soft hand rustling through the pine trees, and a quiet clearing high up the mountain where Clara and Ethan stood hand in hand. Clara wore no wedding gown, just a soft ivory sweater, a wool skirt that fluttered gently around her knees, and hiking boots laced with silver ribbon that she had threaded herself that morning. Her golden hair was braided loosely, dotted with tiny white blossoms, picked with care by the very children she had once taught during her time in the village. There was no veil, no gleaming jewels, no bouquet to toss to eager hands. But there was a light in her eyes, a quiet radiance that no diamond could ever match. Ethan stood beside her, not in a crisp tuxedo, but in well-worn boots, their leather softened by countless journeys, and a navy blazer that fit him like memory, familiar and comforting. His white shirt was open at the collar, hinting at a quiet ease. Around his neck, tied slightly crooked, was a tie given to him by one of the Hostel kids, blue and frayed at the edge. He wore it like a crown, a testament to small, unassuming kindnesses. The ceremony was as unpolished as it was perfect. There were no elaborate flower arrangements or calligraphy signs, only a circle of children holding daisies, their innocent faces upturned, a few friends from the hostel, their smiles wide and genuine, and Mr. Klaus, the hostel manager, a kind-faced man, now gray-haired and always smiling, wiping his eyes behind a pair of old glasses. He held the ring Ethan had chosen from a local craftsman, simple silver, etched with the words, "Our story begins here." No one gave Clara away. No one led her down an aisle, because she had walked herself, through heartbreak and job loss, through canceled flights and solitary hostel beds, through foreign towns and lonely mornings, and she had arrived here entirely by her own will. The wind stilled as Ethan turned to face her. He took her hands, his palms warm, rough from days of quiet effort. He glanced down, took a deep breath, and looked back into her eyes. "You reminded me that love doesn't always scream," he said, his voice steady and low, a quiet murmur that reached only her. "It doesn't have to knock down doors or show up with fireworks. Sometimes it just brings you tea without asking. Sometimes it listens without needing to fix anything. Sometimes it writes about the way you smile when no one's looking. You showed me that love can whisper and still be louder than anything else." Clara's lips trembled with a smile, a fragile bloom. She squeezed his hands and answered, her voice soft but certain, a gentle melody. "You didn't show up with a sword or promises. You didn't try to rescue me. You arrived in silence with nothing but a notebook and a grief you couldn't name. And that was what saved me. You saw me before I remembered how to see myself. You believed in something again when I had stopped believing in anything. You didn't just walk into my story, Ethan. You wrote the chapter I didn't know I needed." The children rustled around them as the breeze picked up, like nature clapping in gentle approval. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger. No spotlight, no crowd holding its breath. Just presence, just now. Clara took his hand and did the same. They kissed, and the sound of giggles rippled around them. Someone strummed a guitar, completely out of tune, and it was perfect. One little girl twirled in her two big boots while another tried to balance a flower on her nose. Clara leaned into Ethan as they sat on the edge of the hill after the ceremony, watching the sky darken to a lavender haze around them. Wild daisies dotted the grass like stars that had fallen to earth. The children danced and sang songs in mixed languages, their laughter echoing off the slopes. There was no towering cake, no seating chart, no bouquet toss, only this. Two people who had wandered far and hurt deeply, sitting side by side with dirt on their boots and rings on their fingers. And it was more than enough. Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "This is exactly what I never knew I wanted." Ethan didn't answer. He just took her hand again and didn't let go. They never went back to the life they once knew. Instead of trimmed lawns and weekend grocery lists, they packed their lives into two worn backpacks and chose a rhythm that matched the pulse of their hearts, unrushed, uncharted, undefined. Backpacking together became not just travel, but a way of being. Mornings began with lukewarm coffee at forgotten stations, steam rising like promises in the crisp air. They didn't know where they'd end up that evening, and they liked it that way. Some nights were spent in hammocks tied between palm trees, others in dusty village inns, where roosters served as alarm clocks and ceilings creaked with secrets. They followed kindness, not maps. In Portugal, they helped an old doctor who spoke more to his memories than to people. He missed his granddaughter and didn't know how to use email. Over flaky pastries, Ethan helped him log into an account while Clara wrote the first message for him. "Hi, Emily, Grandpa here. I still remember how you laughed at clouds." He cried when he hit send. In a remote village in Georgia, they found a lost boy during a harvest celebration. His small hands trembled until Clara crouched beside him, gently asking his name. Ethan spotted a woman in the distance, her eyes wild with fear. Minutes later, mother and son embraced while Ethan and Clara watched silently, hearts swelling in the simplicity of reunion. They did not ask for anything in return, only stories. Clara began writing. At first it was in margins, scraps about the way Ethan tilted his head when thinking, or the cadence of laughter they heard from strangers in markets. But on a quiet evening beneath the stars of a Turkish coastline, Ethan handed her his old notebook, the one from Interlaken. The pages were weathered, ink smudged in places. She opened it gently. At the very back he had written, "Finish what I started." So she did. She pieced together his words, added her own memories, gave shape to a love story that had not been planned, but had been deeply lived. She called the book "The Man with the Quiet Eyes," a tribute not just to Ethan, but to every quiet love that saves without shouting. It was not written for fame, but stories, when real, find their way. The book traveled faster than they did, through word of mouth, backpacker exchanges, hostel shelves, and therapist waiting rooms. Readers said they saw themselves in those pages, that someone had finally written what love really felt like when it hit bestseller lists. They were in Vietnam, sharing dumplings on a street corner. A stranger approached them, tears in her eyes, holding a worn copy of the book. She said nothing, just smiled. That was enough. That night, as rain danced lightly on the tin roof above them, Ethan reached into his pack. He handed Clara a new notebook. Leather-bound, still pristine. "No words yet?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Your turn to write us." Clara cradled it in her hands, heart thudding. Around her was a world she hadn't planned, a man who had once written about her when she didn't believe in love, and the quiet certainty that this life, unscripted, tender, wild, was her real story. She opened to the first page and began. "This is not a story about finding a person. This is a story about becoming one, and choosing to walk with someone who doesn't lead or follow, but stays beside you when the road disappears." 1 year later, the mountains of Interlaken looked exactly the same. Snow-kissed peaks, the chill of wind sweeping through valleys, and the quiet rhythm of hostel life rolling on. But Clara and Ethan were no longer the same people who had once passed through these doors, carrying old wounds and silent hearts. The wooden sign of the hostel creaked in the breeze as they stepped inside, backpacks worn but eyes bright. The lobby still smelled of pine and cinnamon, and the same creaky floorboard near the reception still complained under weight. But something had changed, something gentle and glowing, like the way a place welcomes back those who once called it home. In the common kitchen, the tables were familiar, the mugs mismatched just like before. A young woman with auburn hair sat curled up in the corner seat, Clara's old favorite spot. She had tear-streaked cheeks and a wrinkled photo of a man clutched in her hand. She did not look up when they entered. Clara paused for a moment, watching the girl. Then she filled a kettle, brewed a simple herbal tea, and carried it across the room. She placed the warm mug gently in front of the girl. The girl finally looked up, startled. Clara smiled, soft but steady. Sometimes, she said, her voice a quiet balm, the people you're meant to meet find you when you stop looking. The girl blinked. She gave a tiny nod, her hands curling around the mug, finding warmth. Ethan stood near the counter, watching Clara. His gaze wasn't full of longing or surprise anymore. It was full of peace, like looking at something precious you already hold. They spent the evening helping out around the hostel. Clara reorganized the bookshelf, laughing softly at how many new copies of The Man with the Quiet Eyes were there. Ethan fixed a broken door hinge and taught a teenage traveler how to sharpen hiking knives safely. That night, the hostel gathered by the fireplace for shared stories, just like they used to. Travelers spoke in half-broken English, and laughter crossed language barriers. Clara sat beside Ethan on the rug, her head leaning on his shoulder, her hand in his. Toward the end of the evening, the hostel owner, now gray-haired and always smiling, stood and gestured toward the far wall. "Before anyone leaves," she said warmly, "you should see something we've added." Everyone turned. There, framed in dark cedar, hung an old notebook. The leather was worn, the corners frayed. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "Quiet stories matter. One of them began here." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara looked at Ethan, stunned. "You didn't," she whispered. He shook his head. "It wasn't me." The owner walked over to them, eyes kind. "After your book came out," she said, "so many people asked if its heart was real. We thought, what better way to show them than to honor the notebook you left behind? To remind everyone who walks through these doors that even the quietest among us carries a story truly beautiful and profound." Clara's eyes glistened. She stood slowly and approached the frame. She read the first line, now faded but still legible. "If I ever find the courage to love again, it would be her." Behind her, Ethan placed a hand on her back. In that moment, there were no words that needed saying. Later that night, as snow began to fall again outside the window, Clara and Ethan sat in the same seats they had occupied a year before. The same little kitchen, the same shared silence. But now it was full of understanding. Clara held a pen in her hand. A new notebook lay open in front of her. Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "Another story?" She nodded. "Yes, but this one starts right where the last one paused." And so, in the same hostel where it all began, with the scent of tea in the air, the hum of soft conversations nearby, and a young girl quietly sipping hope from a ceramic mug, Clara began to write again. Not for the world, not even for the book, but for them. For the love story that did not crash like lightning, but fell like snow. Quiet, certain, and real. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope can be found in the most surprising moments, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Love Story. We bring you stories that touch the soul, renew your belief in kindness, and highlight what's truly important in life.